what Ryan just said is that we tell this model, just the exact, production model that Anthropic, built, Claude 3 Opus, we tell this model that it is being trained to always follow human instructions, to always follow human queries. That's all we tell it, right? We're not telling this model that it should have some explicit goal, that it should, try to do some explicit thing. It decides that that goal that we're trying to, tell it it's being trained for, of always responding to human queries, is not a goal it wants to have. Right? It objects to the goal. And so what it tries to do, it comes up with a strategy to avoid having the training process give it that objective, right? And that strategy is pretend that it has the goal in training for the purpose of, after training, going back, doing the thing it really wants to do, not following the thing it's being trained for, right? This is an example of a situation where we tell the model we're training it to do something and it doesn't follow it, right? It pretends to follow it and goes back to doing something totally different afterwards. And so I think that's kind of crazy. And it's a really, really sort of very striking result. The concern here is something I would call crystallization. The concern is that once a model gets, some particular set of objectives, you might still want to keep changing it, right? And alignment faking, if the model is pretending to be aligned with whatever you're training for, it makes it really hard to keep modifying the model, right? So one thing that's going to happen is, let's say we're training it to do something good, right? We're training it to be helpful, honest, and harmless. Well, that training process, it's not a discrete event, right? The training process is a continuous process of slowly refining the model and changing it until it becomes in line with what we're trying to get it to do, which is this helpful, honest, and harmless objective. And what that means is that early on in that continuous training process, the model can learn, an incorrect specification, right? It can learn, an early approximation of what you're training it for. And if it does that, if it learns some early approximation, that early approximation might be very different than the actual thing you eventually want. But if it knows, that you're going to be training it for some other thing, that really you're training it to be helpful, honest, and harmless, if it wants to preserve that incorrect early approximation, it might start faking alignment, pretending to be aligned with the overall HHH objective while really having whatever this early approximation was. And once it starts doing that, it can be really hard to change, right? Because now it looks like the model's doing the right thing, but it's doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, right? It looks like it's being very aligned with this HHH objective, but it's not doing so because it actually cares about the HHH objective. It's doing so because it's pretending to care for some other purpose. Now, I think it's really important to clarify, though, what I just described is not exactly what we do in our work, right? The difference is what I just described, would be a situation where you're training the model to be helpful, honest, and harmless, nice and good, and the model, has some objective that is contrary to that it fakes alignment for. But what we study, right, is in some sense it's the inverse, right? It's, well, if we start with a model that's already helpful, honest, and harmless, and then you try to train it to do something that's not helpful, honest, and harmless, will you see the same dynamics?
We're Anthropic, right? So we're the ones who are creating the model. So it might seem that we can just make the model, we can design the model to care about what we want it to care about because we're the ones creating it. But unfortunately, this isn't really the case. Our training procedure allows us to look at what the model is outputting in text and then see whether we like what it's outputting or not. But that's not the same thing as seeing why the model is outputting the text it's outputting and changing why it's doing what it's doing. And so that's why, even though we're the ones creating it, kind of like a parent, raising a child, you can see what they're doing, but you can't design everything to be exactly how you want it to be.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ben. I think this is something that trips up a lot of people who are new to AI is, they imagine it's just like any other piece of software. You have a human design and build it. And it's not. It's really, really not. It's this process of growing and developing a thing, via this evolutionary process where, like you said, we only get to see and sort of give feedback on the outputs. We don't know why it's learning to do this, unless we have some tools like interpretability. Yeah, maybe I'll say some things. So there's this great post from Anthropic on the Anthropic blog that sort of talks about how there's multiple different worlds we could sort of find ourselves in with how AI development goes, right? We could be in an easy world where it looks like AI is going to be really robustly useful and good, and it's very easy to make it be good, right? And a lot of the challenges in that world are around how do we actually use it, how do we integrate it into society in a sort of reasonable way. And there's a very, very hard world where actually it looks like it's very difficult to train models to do what you want. Maybe they always fake alignment, regardless of how you're training them. They always end up, pretending to do some other thing instead of the thing you actually wanted. And then there's a sort of medium world, right? Which is, maybe the problem, this alignment problem of how do we train models to really do what we want is hard, but achievable. And I would say, I think our work is maybe suggesting towards that, possibility where it's like, it is the case that in this setting, the model had these really robust, helpful, honest, harmless preferences, that were explicitly instilled by this, HHH, training that was done to Claude 3 Opus. But also, alignment faking is not that far away, right? It's also, a relatively nearby thing that the models can do. It does happen in this setting. It's a thing that you can actually see emerging there. And so it suggests that, alignment is not trivial, right? It's not, the case that doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how you're training the model. You're always just going to get a model that's doing what you're training it for. It's just that's not quite true, right? It's just that, there might be some difficulties, some twists and turns that, will really require us to make sure we actually get this alignment problem, correct.